Essay Specialist at Admission Masters. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Vincent Kim.
Thank you, Jason, for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you to the Creative Times for setting up this opportunity for us. So today I wanted to talk with you guys about COVID-19 and how it's going to potentially have some impacts on college admissions, in particular for some of the more selective universities in the nation. I want to start with some admissions trends first and foremost so that you guys are aware of what exactly the state of college admissions currently looks like. And I wanted to talk first about the UCs, which I know Randolph kind of talked about just before my presentation here. What I like to point out to most of my students is that things are not easy. It is very challenging to get accepted to these schools. If you take a look at schools like UCLA, UC Berkeley, you're looking at about a 4.1 to 4.3 GPA for the middle 50th percentile of students. Even for schools like UC San Diego or UC Irvine, you're looking at a GPA above a 4.0. I don't know if you guys know this, but the UC GPA is calculated in a very particular way. So they don't consider just all of your classes, the grades that you've gotten in all of your classes for all 4 years of high school. They're only going to be looking at the A through G courses, which will take into account pretty much all your courses except for your classes like health or PE. They also will be looking at only your grades from the summer after freshman year to the summer after your junior year. So during this 2-year period, they're going to be looking at things like your A through G courses. And we're going to be trying to see, have you been excelling within these courses? So once again, it is very challenging. Obviously, beyond the UCs, you're looking at even more selective schools like the Ivy Leagues. You'll notice schools like Tufts or NYU, for example, they even have acceptance rates at about a 15% rate, which is very selective. Things, again, are not necessarily the easiest, but something that's kind of interesting is that within this past year, the 2020 college acceptance rates have actually increased for a few schools, albeit somewhat slightly. So for example, for Columbia, MIT, and Yale, the acceptance rates have gone up a little bit. For Columbia, went up from about a 5.1% to a 6.1%. For MIT, it went from a 6.6% to a 7.3%. For Yale, it went from 5.9 to 6.5. And I like to point this out because there are reasons for why this oftentimes happens, and this is something that we always want to try and keep up to date with. For example, for Yale, they are actually on their 4th year of expanding their freshman class size since they've added 2 new colleges, the Paul Murray and Benjamin Franklin colleges. So it makes sense why they've been accepting a few more students. Another major trend that might affect the class of 2021 is the fact that COVID-19 has been limiting student travel, especially for international students. And that could potentially mean that international students might not be as keen on applying for some of these colleges this year, which could have an effect on the amount of acceptances for domestic students in particular. So these trends are always some things that we want to keep aware of as we're working with our students. But again, just to kind of reiterate, at the end of the day, these programs, these schools are still very selective. And we want to do everything we can to try to maximize our chances of getting accepted to these schools. So let's talk about some notable changes in admissions. Some of these things you guys might be a little bit aware of already, but why don't we go ahead and start with some standardized testing, some news in standardized testing. As you guys already know, and as the previous speakers have kind of mentioned, many colleges have decided to move to test optional. So a lot of top tier schools like UPenn, Cornell, Dartmouth, they have decided that because of the COVID pandemic and the fact that a lot of testing opportunities have been canceled, they're going to go ahead and give students the option to submit their applications without a test score. A question that a lot of my students have is, should I still aim to take the SAT or ACT? And my answer for most students has been, if possible, yes. I still think it's a good idea for you to try to take these tests because even though colleges like to say that students will not be disadvantaged if they don't submit these test scores, at the end of the day, if you're submitting a really strong test score, these admissions officers don't have a choice but to take those into consideration, which can present an advantage for those students who end up submitting them. And in addition to that, if you submit a really strong test score, it can help corroborate strong grades, should you have them. And potentially scholarship opportunities as well might depend on one of these test scores too. So if you have the option to take these test scores, I know that it might not happen. The August test has already been canceled for a lot of SoCal test centers. This might end up getting canceled in future months as well. But if they do end up happening, and if you've been studying, my recommendation is to try to take the SAT or the ACT if possible. Again, it can potentially present an advantage if you're applying for these colleges. Another big change is early applications, which for now, the big one is Princeton, who's removed their single choice early action program. A lot of students are asking me, are other colleges going to start following suit? Are there still going to be opportunities for me to apply early action, early decision? We'll talk about these in a moment here, but for the most part, we're kind of taking a wait and see approach to see if other schools start following suit. Again, if a lot of testing opportunities in the future, August, September, October, if these test opportunities get canceled, then it's possible that other schools might end up following in Princeton's footsteps and get rid of their early options. But for now, many schools are still keeping them. And so whether or not you should still apply early depends on a few things, but my overarching recommendation for most students is that yes, you should try to apply early if possible. There's two reasons for why it may not be the best idea, even for early action, which again, I'll give you the definitions of these in a second. But if you're applying early, you're not applying by the January deadline for most colleges. You're going to be applying typically by November 1st. What that means is if you don't have a solid test score by October or November, which is usually the last date that you can take these tests for early applications, or if your grades aren't the best by your junior year, second semester, it might not be the best idea to apply early. And the reason for that is because you could instead apply regular decision in January with potentially a higher test score. You can get straight A's your first semester senior year and allow those grades to improve your GPA by the time that you apply. However, if your test scores are already pretty set, they're already really good, and if your grades are also really good as well by the time you finish your junior year, my recommendation again is that you should try and take advantage of the early options. So for those of you who are unaware, there are three early options. Number one, there's early action. Early action is a non-binding type of application, meaning if you apply early action to a school, and if you are accepted, you do not have to go to that college. So schools like Princeton, for example, which has a single choice early action policy, schools like MIT and Caltech, they offer something called early action. Again, if you apply there, you do not have to go if you're accepted. So why would you want to apply early action? There's a few reasons. Number one, you can apply earlier and get your application over with and get your results back sooner. So while everyone is scrambling and getting their applications finished by January, you are done, and you might potentially already know some of the colleges that you've already been accepted to. Number two, early action could potentially improve your chances of acceptance, albeit again, very slightly. When you apply early action, the pool of competition is smaller, though it may be more competitive. And so if you apply early action, sometimes it can slightly improve your chances of getting in. Although some schools like Caltech, for example, their early action acceptance rates and their regular decision acceptance rates are nearly identical. But again, if you can apply early action, it usually does not hurt because you do not have to commit to the school if you're accepted. Early decision, on the other hand, is a very serious decision because if you are accepted early decision, you have to go. So my recommendation for whether or not you should apply early decision should be if number one, there's a college that you love that offers it. Number two, you're 100% certain that you want to go. And number three, it should be your number one choice school. If it satisfies all three of those criteria, I always recommend that you try and apply early decision. Again, as long as your grades and your test scores are solid by the time that you apply, because early decision typically gives you the best chance of getting accepted. And again, this might differ from school to school, but overall, early decision demonstrates your interest in the college. It shows that you're committed, and for that reason, colleges may be more keen on accepting you if you apply early decision. So I do recommend it. If you do apply ED, you can only apply to one college. If you apply early action, you can apply to every early action school, pretty much. And then there's a very interesting type of early action called single choice or restrictive early action. Princeton, like I said, has a single choice early action policy, as does Stanford, Harvard, and Yale, which pretty much just means if you applied early to those schools, you're not really allowed to apply early decision or early action anywhere else. You can apply early action to public schools, but you're not allowed to apply early action to private schools, and you cannot commit to any school through early decision. There are some schools like Georgetown and Notre Dame that offer restrictive early action policies where they allow you to apply early action anywhere, but they do not allow you to apply early decision anywhere. So once again, these are early options that might potentially change due to COVID, but for now, I am recommending that students take advantage of early options if possible. In fact, my hunch is that there may be fewer students this year applying early decision than in previous years. And the reason being, a lot of students can't travel. They can't physically visit these colleges. And as such, they might not know if they're 100% committed to attending these schools. And so if you know for a fact, again, you're 100% sure you're committed to a college and you want to apply early decision, it may, again, potentially be slightly easier this year than in previous years. All right. We'll wait on the news to see how these early options may change in the future, but these are some of the main things that you guys have to know for now regarding how COVID is affecting early options. The last thing that is interesting is the fact that there may be higher enrollment deferrals this year. So for those of you who don't know what enrollment deferrals are, it pretty much just means for the class of 2020 in this case, they've been accepted, but they don't want to attend college the first year. So they're asking schools, can I push it back a year? And there's a few reasons for this. There's issues with paying for college this year. There's a lot of issues with safety, whether or not it's safe enough to physically go back to school. There's problems with online learning. Many students don't feel like it's worth it to pay this much money for an online learning opportunity. And so they're asking colleges, they're requesting for enrollment deferrals. This year, if that ends up happening, if more students end up getting their deferrals accepted, it could potentially make it more difficult for subsequent years like the class of 2022. So if there are more students who are pushing back their acceptances to the following year, unfortunately for rising juniors who'll be seniors next year, there may be fewer spots available for those who will be applying for college. I don't think it's anything that you need to be very concerned about. It's not something that I think you need to panic over. At the end of the day, these colleges still have to accept your deferral. They have to approve of your deferrals. But again, this year more than most, there will likely be higher enrollment deferrals. And that's something that we're going to need to be aware of as we move into future application seasons. So what should we be doing? I think, based on all this information, again, it seems like things can be very tough. I have many students who believe that they can just kind of do not as much because there's as many opportunities available to them. And so because they're kind of stuck at home, they think that as long as they're excelling their courses, there's really no need to do really more than that, maybe study for these standardized tests. However, I'm telling you right now that there is still plenty that you can do even though you're stuck at home. So one of the main things that I'm going to be looking for as an application reader, as an admissions officer, are you still staying active? Are you still taking the initiative to do more? There are still, again, I know that a lot of opportunities have kind of been cut, summer programs, internships, but there's still so many opportunities that are available to you, even if you're stuck at home. And I would definitely want to see if my students are taking advantage of these. So there's virtual competitions. I have my students doing essay competitions and art competitions. There's independent projects. I've had students create YouTube channels, blogs. I've had students create their own nonprofit organizations. You can take advantage of online courses, obviously standardized test prep if possible. There's also going to be online programs and internships that I've had students take advantage of, and obviously also volunteering opportunities. There's so much that you can still do. And yes, again, I understand that many opportunities have been cut, but if you're really not doing anything else except for maybe studying for your standardized tests and preparing for your courses for next year, you are not at the same level as a lot of these students who will be applying for very top tier colleges. So make sure that you are still taking the initiative, trying to find these opportunities and seeing if you can take advantage of them. The second thing is going to be, are you excelling? So again, I think, a main thing that I want you guys to keep in mind is that colleges are going to be understanding. They're going to know that there were issues with online learning, that there was a transition period for students, but they still will be curious to see, are you excelling? So with the courses offered to you, with the online learning opportunities open to you, have you still been getting A's in your classes? Have you still been challenging yourself to take the most rigorous courses that you can? For standardized testing, if you could take these tests, are you still doing well on these tests? In addition, we're going to want to see again that you are still excelling with what is offered to you. Before I move on, I just want to again give everyone a quick reminder. If you guys have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function and our staff will be on standby answering your questions throughout. All right. Moving on from here, more important maybe than previous years will be your teacher relationships, which I feel like a lot of students misleadingly or are kind of misinterpreting kind of how important these will be. They're not fully understanding how these will play a role in the college admissions process. When I was an application reader at Yale, I'd have to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 things like your academics, your extracurriculars, your essays, and your teacher recommendations. It had its very own category. And if you're not getting amazing teacher recommendations, it makes it very difficult for you to get accepted to a very top tier institution like Yale. And so one of the things that we're going to be looking for is, have you been taking advantage of this opportunity to build these relationships with your teachers, even if you couldn't see them in person? So things like participation, making sure that you're still participating as often as you can within your Zoom classes. Things like attending office hours if they are offering them. staying in constant communication with your teachers, right? Emailing them, just personal messages throughout the day or throughout the week, showing them that you're still kind of thinking about them, thanking them for the work they've been doing to help you during office hours, for example, sharing projects with them. If you've made I don't know, a video, or if you made a blog, are you sharing this with them and trying to build these relationships, even if it's virtual? These teacher recommendations I'll talk about a little bit more down the line, but I just want to stress again that these will be very important, and you want to make sure that you are developing strong relationships throughout this following year, especially for my rising juniors. We're also going to need to see if you've had any extenuating circumstances. And like I said before, colleges are going to be very understanding. We're not going to, all of the admissions officers that I've ever met have been extremely empathetic. They always try to give you the benefit of the doubt. And for the common application this year, they've actually added a new COVID-19 essay section where you can write about things like your family circumstances and how they've been affected due to COVID, or your future plans, or your educational challenges. Please don't feel like this is a way for you to just give them an excuse, right? Don't think of this as like, well, I don't want to, tell them this because I don't want them to think like I'm just trying to create an excuse for why I got to be in this class. If you have a legitimate reason for why you've been struggling, or if there's been something that's been happening, please communicate that with colleges. They want to see this. They want to contextualize how you've been doing, and spaces like this new essay portion on the common application are perfect for you to be able to explain these things. And then finally, we're going to want to know, are you still demonstrating interest in the school? Once again, I know you can't physically visit, as of right now at least. You can't really visit these colleges, but we do want to make sure that you are doing what you can to learn about our college. Because of COVID, a lot of schools have been scrambling to create different opportunities for students to do some virtual learning for their schools. So there's been information sessions where you can meet with alumni or current college students. There's been virtual tours. They're offering more virtual interview opportunities this year. And so if you are still interested in these colleges, you have to be able to demonstrate that to them. And with your college essays, for example, you can show them how you've been taking advantage of these things, right? Interviews, information sessions, tours. If you're not demonstrating interest in the school, it'll be hard for them to really see whether or not you want to go there. So still, again, a big piece of this will be trying to do what you can, even if it's virtual, to learn as much as you can about these colleges. All right. So at the end of the day, what are these colleges looking for? Well, there's a few things. I actually pulled this from my time at UPenn, but one of the things that colleges, and especially Ivy League schools like UPenn, will be looking for is, number one, what kind of impact are you going to have on this campus? Just because you're stuck at home does not mean you can't make an impact. I know, again, there's not as much you can do, but there's still things that are open to you that you can still take advantage of. And so are you still doing what you can to take initiative? Are you doing what you can to show that you can have an impact on these colleges, even when you're stuck at home, right? I have students creating care packages, for example, or even just something as simple as writing letters to healthcare workers. Even that can show us the work that you're putting in to try and influence the community that you live in. So that impact is going to be very important. We're also going to want to know what the student is like. Who are you? What do you care about? What are you passionate about? What are you going to be doing when you come to our school, right? What will you be bringing when you come here? But of course, also, how are we going to help you? I feel like this part of the question, students don't really think of too much when they're working on their college applications. Most of the time, they just want to paint themselves as the best applicant possible. They want to make themselves seem like they are, going to be useful and will immediately have an impact on the campus. What they don't often think about is, well, what's the college going to offer me? And colleges are really curious about that, right? They want to know, well, if you come here, how are we going to present you with the opportunities and the resources for you to be able to succeed? Are we going to help you to fulfill your potential? Are we going to be a good fit for you? And these are things that you want to think about. And especially within these Why College essays, which again, I'll talk about down the line, you guys want to be able to demonstrate that. Again, not just what will I bring, but how are you going to help me? How am I going to take advantage of the things that you guys offer to me? I won't get into this too much. I know, again, previous speakers, Dr. Anger has talked about this already. Just to kind of stress one more time, at the end of the day, it's not just your grades. It's not just your test scores. The college admissions process, you've heard this a million times, is a holistic process, meaning we take into account many things. like your level of rigor, what was available to you in your high school. When you actually apply for these colleges, what we get as an application reader, what I'll see is whether or not you had, we'll get a class profile or a school profile, which pretty much just provides us with the context we need to understand how many AP classes were offered at your school, what kind of activities were there, how many students go there, what's the average GPA and test scores. Getting this school profile gives us a lot of information that helps us to better understand how you succeeded, right? And not just necessarily the numbers themselves. So all of these things at the end of the day, again, we'll consider. And I won't get into this too much, but just keep in mind that even if you don't have the best grades or test scores, that is important. But even if you don't have the best grades or test scores, there are other ways that you can stress portions of your application to try and make you a competitive applicant for these schools. Getting into these application components, I just want to talk about kind of my time at Yale really quickly. Once again, the holistic process takes into account a few things: your academics, your activities, your recommendations, and your essays. If you guys are looking to apply for a very selective institution, like an Ivy League school, I'm telling you right now that it's not necessarily just about getting straight A's or just about being the president of 2 clubs, right? When I'm trying to rate you on a scale of 1 to 5, a 1 being, I guess, the lowest applicant and a 5 being the best applicant for each of these categories. For your academics, I'm looking at more than just your GPA and your test scores. I'm looking for, you could have a 4.0 GPA. You could have a 1600 SAT score. That wouldn't qualify you to be a 5 applicant for Yale, at least. And there are other things that we're looking for. Your competition, that will be a 5 applicant. This will be someone who is a national winner for Science Olympiad, for example. This will be a USAMO contestant, the USA Math Olympiad. These are going to be people who are excelling at the highest level. And so that's something that you're looking at. That when I have students who are saying like, well, I have straight A's, I think I should, give Yale a shot. I like to stress to my students, well, there's a lot more that we're looking for than just getting straight A's. For your activities, again, I'm rating you on a scale of 1 to 5. So when we're looking at your activities, it's not just being about the president or founder of 4 different clubs, for example, right? I have so many students who make clubs and they say that they're the president or the captain of a team or whatever. And yes, that looks good. At the end of the day, that could look strong for your resume. But what I'm really curious about is, well, what did you do in those activities, right? I can't tell you how many times I meet a student who says, well, I'm the president of this club, but all we do is we do meetings and we do fundraisers. It's very vanilla, right? What you're doing within these activities is extremely important. And that's something that I would always be looking towards, not only in your activities portion of your common application, but also within your essays, right? What impact are you making on your community? So the type of student who gets accepted to Yale, for example, a 5 applicant, in terms of activities, I'm telling you right now, these are national debate champions. These are state level, like state renowned swimmers, for example. These are people who've published books, for example. These are people who've done college level research with professors. Activities go far beyond just the label. And that's something that, again, I like to stress to my students. For recommendations, I've talked about this. Recommendations have its very own category when we're reviewing your application, and we're rating you on a scale of 1 to 5. A 5 applicant for a recommendation is someone who has an outstanding recommendation from all of the teachers and the counselors they've submitted them for. Meaning the teachers have said things like, in the past 20, 30 years that I've worked here, this has been one of the students that has clearly stood out to me in terms of the effort he puts in terms of his promise for the future, in terms of his curiosity. The recommendation letters are a key component of these schools. And if you don't have strong recommendations, if your teachers say things like, well, he's brilliant, but he's shy, or he's really smart, but he doesn't take that next step to try and take advantage of his potential. If they don't say things like this, you're making it harder on yourself to get accepted to, again, a school like Yale. And then finally, you have your essays, which for your essays, again, if you want an amazing essay, it's not just about writing well, which is an important part of it. It's also about the story that you're telling. What are you demonstrating to us? What are you going to be bringing when you come to our school? Have you demonstrated growth from your experiences? What insights, what lessons have you gained from your experiences? All of these things are key components of the application process for these very selective schools. And you still, again, regardless of COVID, need to be able to demonstrate that you're excelling within these categories if you want a good chance at acceptance. Getting into the academics just a little bit more here. Again, like I said, we're looking at things not just beyond your grades, but also the trends in your grades. I have students asking me, well, I got 2 Bs in my freshman year. Does that mean I have no chance at a shot at, for a school like Stanford or Yale? And no, If you're demonstrating that you've done well since then, that you've adapted, that you're doing better and better every semester, even by taking the most rigorous courses, that is something that we'll definitely be happy to see. So the trends in your grades, the course rigor, meaning if they offered you, 10 AP classes you could take for your junior and senior years, did you take all 10? Or did you only opt to take 2, right? Sometimes a popular question a lot of times is it better for me to get an A in a regular class or a B in an AP class? And the answer that a lot of students aren't very happy with is, well, you should get an A in an AP class because your competition is going to be taking the most rigorous courses possible, and they're going to be getting A's in them. So it's really about, again, the courses offered at your high school, how well you've been doing in them, whether or not you've been trying to maximize the rigor of your courses, and also the trends within your grades. All of these things comprise how we'll be taking a look at your academics. For your recommendation letters, you always want to make sure that you're getting the teacher recommendations from those who are the closest with you. Whoever you think will write you the best recommendations. Typically, it's going to be from more recent teachers, like junior year teachers. And again, beyond just thinking about the subject that they teach, which for some schools like MIT, they recommend that you have a English or history teacher's recommendation and a math or science teacher's recommendation. But you also want to make sure that you're getting them from just the teachers that you're the closest with. So if you, for most colleges, it doesn't really matter which subject they teach, as long as they speak very highly of you, as long as, again, like I said earlier, they're going to be talking about not just your ability to succeed in the class, but your curiosity, your desire to help others, your leadership. If they can touch on all of these things for you, for your recommendations, you're making a stronger case for yourself. Beyond the teacher recommendations, you're also going to need recommendations from your guidance counselor. You don't usually even have to ask your counselors to do this for you. They're just going to write it. So I have a lot of students who have like solid relationships with their teachers, but they don't have the best relationships with their counselor. And that's a problem. And I know at larger public schools, it can be harder for you to develop these relationships, but you still need to make sure that you are trying to do what you can to talk with your counselors and try to build some relationships with them. Because again, at the end of the day, they will be writing you a recommendation for your colleges. The last thing is going to be supplemental recommendations, which some schools will allow you to submit. Supplemental recommendations will be from non-academic teachers and counselors. So this could be like an art teacher or a coach or a professor that you did an internship with, for example. I always say supplemental recommendations you should only submit if they're, number one, glowing, and number two, if they're going to provide new information. If you get amazing teacher recommendations and if you get amazing counselor recommendations, but you submit a supplemental rec letter that's mediocre, it could end up sacrificing the overall quality of all of your recommendations. So again, you should only be submitting these again if they're going to submit new information and if they are going to be very glowing, if they're stellar. All right, getting into just activities. Again, it's not about what you're doing. It's about why you're doing it. Right? Through this situation right now, looking into the pandemic, what we're most curious about is not just the fact that you tried to do some fundraisers to help people, but why you did that. Why did you want to, create a GoFundMe to help businesses that were looted, for example? Or why did you want to create these care packages for healthcare workers, right? The why is what matters, and your essays will give us an opportunity for us to see that. Right? Why are you passionate about this? Why did you choose to do this? At the end of the day, your essays will give you the chance to show this. And your essays should not just be about what you think colleges want to see. It needs to paint something about yourself, right? Who are you? What do you want to demonstrate to colleges? What are you truly passionate about? These are the things that you're aiming to discuss in your essays. In your school-specific essays, you're going to want to show that you're going to be a good fit for these colleges. All right, I'm running out of time here a little bit, so I'm just gonna move forward into just some final tips here. First things first, once again, if you are preparing for your SAT and ACT right now, crossing our fingers, hopefully it still happens, I want you to make sure that you're continuing to prepare for these tests. And if you are getting a good score, it can potentially present an advantage for you. But again, this year more than most, if you don't have a test score that you can be submitting, don't panic, right? These are still test optional schools. So I don't want you to think that you have to force yourself to take these tests, especially if you haven't really been preparing or if you're not anticipating that you can get a good score. You still need to excel. You need to show to colleges that within the opportunities available to you, you're still taking advantage of them and you're still doing as well as possible by getting good grades and getting good test scores if you can. Consider applying early. Again, especially if your grades and your test scores are good to go, you might want to take advantage of early action especially, but if there's a college you love that offers early decision, you might want to take advantage of early decision too. Once again, these options might change depending on how things go, but we do want to make sure that you are applying early if possible. Stay active, take the initiative to do more. I want you to try to build on your teacher relationships. Do not let online learning be an excuse for you to not build your relationships with your teachers. Try your best to get close with them as early and as often as possible. And finally, within your essays, be open. Tell us what we need to know. Explain any extenuating circumstances that we need to be aware of. All right. Just closing out here. We do have a podcast. A few of my colleagues and I have a podcast where we talk about the college admissions process. Feel free to check us out. It's called the Hall Pass Podcast. And if you guys want a free hour consultation, go ahead and call us at this number or visit our website at theadmissionmasters.com. Thank you very much.